Okay. Well, good morning. As James said, my name is Aaron Cassavant. I'm one of the deacons here. I want to call your attention in your bulletin to the announcement sheet. Don't forget about this. There's a lot of material in here. I won't go through all of it, but I do want to make sure that you saw that. There's a backside too, so if you just looked at the front, you would miss a couple of important announcements about American Heritage Girls and Power Volleyball, so don't miss those. And speaking of our American Heritage Girls troop, they are on their way up to New England Frontier Camp this week, which is in Lovell, Maine. And so my wife is the troop coordinator. Her name's Candace, and she's taking, I think, 35 or 36 young ladies up for a week of canoeing, kayaking, rope climbing, rifles, archery, paintball. And so if you have a chance to remember them this week in prayer, I encourage you to do so, that they would grow closer together as a troop, that they would grow closer to God as they are in the beautiful Maine wilderness. So I just wanted to point that out. So my son Calvin's sitting there in the middle row there, and he looked around before the service started, and he said, wow, there's a lot of people there. Better not screw it up. Nothing like the emotional support of a 15-year-old young man for you. So, so with that, let's turn to it. Today I'm going to talk about judgment. And before I rush headlong into the sermon, I want to sort of frame the discussion by describing some of the concepts that are embedded in the topic of judgment itself. You need only look at the headlines and the fact that the most used apps on your smartphone are social media apps, and to know that we live in a very self-centered, self-obsessed, post-truth world. And so you may have heard statements like, he's finding his truth, or you have to live your own truth. And so these statements would seem to suggest that what you find there in your authentic self is the most solid foundation for your life, that you need only find who you truly are to be happy. And as a result, the idea that there is some sort of external, objective standard by which our actions and choices are evaluated is almost incomprehensible. In fact, to even suggest that this is the case stands in stark contrast to the ideals of our culture, which, above almost everything else, says that it values tolerance, open-mindedness, non-judgmentalism. And so I would, ask yourself if anybody who has ever been canceled would agree with that, but our culture at least says that it is tolerant and open-minded, and such has a somewhat reflexive, allergic reaction to the concept of judgment. And unsurprisingly, this is not what we find in the Bible, which is very clear that there is an external moral standard, and is also very honest about the fact that we, sinful humans, cannot hope to comply with it. This comparison between an external standard and behavior is what's called judgment, right? I am evaluating behavior in accordance with a standard. And in my model, I'm using the standard to evaluate in an action. I'm measuring the distance between an observed behavior action statement and a moral standard. And so this brief introduction to the concept of judgment or evaluation should prompt a couple of rhetorical questions in your mind. You might ask yourself, well, I guess I'd want to make sure that I'm observing the action correctly, because if I'm going to evaluate the action, I want to make sure that I perceive it correctly. We have limitations in perception. We don't see things properly. Maybe you need corrective lenses, right? So you wouldn't put a guy on the witness stand for describe an accident at an intersection 150 yards away when he's nearsighted, because there are problems of perception, right? So you want to make sure that you're perceiving the action correctly. Another thing that you want to understand is what the standard is. You want to make sure that you understand what the rule to be applied is, so that you're not rushing into judgment. And so these rhetorical questions frame up the issue of evaluating actions and behaviors by a standard. And so with that in mind, we now turn our attention to one of the most misunderstood and misinterpreted passages in the entire Bible. We will be today in Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 6. Textually, we remain in sort of the concluding sections of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is bringing this majestic sermon in for a landing. And so in this section, we start to see some of the applications of the lessons that have gone before. And so in this passage, Jesus discusses the topic of judging others. And notably, he does not forbid doing so. Instead, he prescribes a very specific, very careful way to do it. This fact is usually glossed over by those who misinterpret the first verse, referring to that verse as proof that the Bible forbids Christians from ever passing judgment on another person. This is usually done on the way to justifying their own sinful behavior. And because of this prevalent misinterpretation, my goal this morning is to carefully analyze Jesus' words and the context in which they appear, and then learn to apply the lessons for properly judging other people. So let's pray. Father, help us to understand what your Son is teaching in these verses. Give us the grace to see that undue harshness and a judgmental attitude towards others will result in us receiving the same measure that we treat them with. Replace our self-righteousness with your righteousness and prepare our hearts to judge correctly with the goal of returning a brother or sister to deeper relationship with you. Amen. Let's read the passage together. Chapter 7, verse 1. Judge not, that you be not judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there is a log in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Do not give the dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you. So in our broad analytical framework, we divide this into two sections. The first section that we're going to talk about is understanding the scriptures. What do these verses say? And the first thing that I want you to take away from this is that Jesus does not forbid judging others. Let's look at the first command of the passage. Judge not, that you be not judged. The verb to judge means to pronounce an opinion concerning right or wrong. And the passage makes it clear that these opinions concerning right or wrong have to do with someone else, your brother or your sister. So taken out of context, it appears that Jesus is prohibiting his followers from pronouncing opinions concerning the rightness or wrongness of another's actions. But this seems inconsistent with only several verses later in which Jesus speaks about recognizing false prophets by their fruit. So when you meet someone who trots this verse out, 7:1, and says, well, look, the Bible itself says, judge not lest ye be judged, you might say to them, well, let's step back and look at the entire context, because it's clear that Jesus does not forbid his followers from judging people by their fruits. Listen to the verse 15 through 17. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So every tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. Similarly, in verse 7, Jesus commands his followers to not give the dogs what is holy and their pearls to pigs. In other words, even textually drawing out these distinctions, good fruit, bad fruit, don't cast your pearls to pigs and dogs, presumes that there is some ability on the part of his followers to discern, to judge right and wrong. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is not does Jesus forbid judging others, but what type of judging is Jesus forbidding? And this opens up an entire category of your heart, of motive. And so let's look at what Jesus is forbidding. The answer is suggested by the warning that closely follows the command. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and the measure you use, it will be measured to you. He is not forbidding judging. He is forbidding self-righteously judging others. What he rules out is the self-righteous pride that views yourself as better than someone else. The type of pride that makes you think that you can do nothing wrong. The type of pride that excuses your own sins while mercilessly calling out another for theirs. The type of pride that disregards the struggle that we all have with leftover indwelling sin in favor of harsh condemnation. The type of pride that minimizes the profound effect of the world's temptations and confusions on a given individual. The type of pride that ignores just how much you yourself have been forgiven. In other words, this is the type of pride that would condemn another person guilty before God. And as we will see, that is not our job when judging others. Let's look at an example of this type of pride. Turn with me to Luke chapter 18, verses 9 through 14. We'll go there together. So just a couple books over in the Gospel of Luke. Jesus also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. 2 men went up in the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all I get. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift up his eyes to heaven and beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. In this passage, the Pharisee thinks that he was righteous. And in Jesus' time and to his audience, the Pharisee would have had a compelling point. Let's take a look at the bullet points that he's got. He fasts twice a week, which exceeds the single annual requirement for the Jewish people in the Torah on the Day of Atonement. He gives tithes of all he gets, rather than just the tithes of crops that is required by the law. He doesn't extort people. He was just. He was even faithful to his wife. But Jesus pulls the rug out from him because it was the tax collector who depended on God's mercy, not the Pharisee who outwardly appears to be self-righteous, who was pronounced justified. So in other words, there's no place for self-righteousness and boastful pride in the kingdom of God. Why? Because we are all sinners and stand equally before God in need of a Savior. And Jesus' warning holds. If you are harsh and judgmental towards others, if you are quick to find fault in and condemn them, put them down to make yourself feel better, minimize and undermine their achievements, emphasize their faults and imperfections, you should have care. Because Jesus says that this is the exact same yardstick that will be applied to you. But if you are merciful towards others, God will be merciful to you. That should sound familiar as we have sat through teaching on the Sermon on the Mount these past several months. Matthew 5:7 says, Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Matthew 6:12, which we just said together, says, Forgive us our debts as we have also forgiven our debtors. And Jesus' half-brother James reminds us in James 2:13, For judgment is without mercy to one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. This concept that the measuring stick we use for others will be applied to us is central to God's law. What you do to others will be done to you. Little wonder then that Jesus says in verse 12 of chapter 7 here in Matthew, So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. So as we try to understand what Jesus is saying and the type of judgment that he is forbidding, we must understand the entirety of the law, the teaching of the prophets, which is you should treat others the way that you want to be treated, and in an ever-increasing way for a Christian that is being increasingly sanctified, the characteristic of treating others will become more and more natural for you who love God with all of your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus drives home the point a little bit later in the book of Matthew in the parable of the unforgiving servant. That's in Matthew chapter 18, 23 through 35. We won't read it all together, but you remember this parable, right? As he tells it, there is a king who has a servant. That servant owes him 10,000 talents. That is an unimaginable sum for the hearers that would be listening to that parable. It's about $6 billion today. And the king forgives the debt. That same servant, having been just forgiven by the king, walks outside and sees another servant who owes him 100 denarii, which is about $12,000. And he lays hands on that second servant, choking him and saying, Pay me what you owe me. And Jesus concludes the parable with the same type of warning that he gives us in Matthew 7, which says, You wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. And should not you have had mercy on your fellow servant, as I had mercy on you?' And in anger his master delivered him to the jailers until he should pay all his debt. So also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart." I want to be clear. A transformed heart, one that has been saved through faith in Jesus, offers the same mercy and forgiveness as has been received from God. So someone who does not grant this same forgiveness to others, who judges harshly, self-righteously, like the Pharisee, "I thank you that I am not like other men, including this guy," shows that your own heart, that heart, has not experienced God's forgiveness. And this should give you pause, because Jesus says that you will be liable for those consequences yourself. The transformed heart offers the same mercy and forgiveness that has been received from God. With that in mind, Jesus provides us with the correct way to judge others. He uses vivid imagery to illustrate the teaching about judging others in a spirit of self-righteousness. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, "Let me take the speck out of your eye," when there isn't a log in your own eye? I think Jesus has a lot of experience with specks, splinters, logs, and beams. He was a carpenter, after all. And so he uses intentional overstatement to make his point, which is that we should be very careful indeed about judging others because we are also sinners. It's not that we can never judge others or rightly reprove another the sin that we see in someone's life, but that we must do so in accordance with Jesus' instructions. And so as we transition to the section in which we understand ourselves and the world, we look then to the prescription for the things that are in our eyes. So let's now look at some of the principles that God gives us when we judge others. Jesus knows that as we live this life together in this fallen world, there will be times when we as his followers must call out the sin we see in someone else's life. Why? Because we love them. We genuinely want what's best for them. We do not desire that they labor under the burden of sin and ultimately perhaps perish. And so we are compelled to say something. At the same time, Jesus recognizes that because of our sin natures, we are at great risk in that transaction of taking on a role while judging them that only God can do. Let's look again at a clue in verse 3. Jesus says, "Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye?" See, both individuals have things in their eyes that need removal to see correctly, speck and log. But the one who is observing the other is prone to underestimate the size of his or her own problem and overestimate the size of the brother's problem, right? This is not accidental. And as I parse through these parables carefully to present them to you, it's become ever more clear to me that nothing that Jesus says is accidental. So I just commend that to you as you study the Bible yourself. But because of our sin nature, we underestimate the problem of sin in our own lives and overestimate the problem in our brothers' or sisters' lives. And so we do not accurately assess the situation when we go to judge others. So Jesus gives us some helpful instructions, and I want to give us 4 of these instructions. So first, the first thing, when you contemplate a situation where you think about judging someone else, you must honestly confront the sin in your own life before judging someone else. You must honestly confront your own sin before you confront someone else's sin. Listen to Jesus' words. "You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye." There is a sequence of events here. First, you take the log out of your own eye. Then, and only then, can you see clearly to take the speck out of your brother or sister's eye. You see it? You start, when you see sin in somebody else's life, the first thing you do is not walk over to them and talk to them about it. The first thing that you do is say, all right, let's look at my own heart. Right? This is counterintuitive. This is not what we do. On Facebook, we blast them. We take their actions and we send flaming arrows their way self-satisfied and self-righteously assured that we are doing the Lord's work, right? Jesus' instructions for judging others is perceive the situation and look inward. First, you look at your own sin. And that makes sense, I think, right? As much as we intuitively want to go hammer and tongs at perceived injustice, but you would consider yourself unqualified to give instruction about a skill that you had not mastered yourself. Likewise, you find it difficult to help someone else with their sin problem when you have unconfessed, undiagnosed sin in your own life. Compounding the matter, that person that you're attempting to judge will very easily see that you have unaddressed sin in your life, leading them to dismiss everything that comes out of your mouth after you say, hey, I got to talk to you about something. In fact, it may be advisable if you struggle with the same sin that you can see in another, because, look, I can recognize leftover indwelling sin patterns in somebody else that look a lot like mine, and perhaps I refrain from judging that person, and I go to a brother or sister and say, you do not struggle with this the way that I do, but I think that it may be advisable for you to talk to this individual. Again, because the person who you go to judge will say, you struggle with the exact same thing I struggle with. How dare you stand in judgment for me? So from a practical perspective, I suggest that you ask God to reveal your leftover indwelling sin patterns, and the Holy Spirit will show them to you so that you can turn from them and repent. You can also ask other people. You can say, again, remember, we are looking at a sin pattern in somebody's life, and I'm doing a bunch of homework before I go talk to them, right? Like there's a sense of deliberateness and slowness here. And so first I confess the sin in my own life. Then I go to my friend and I say, Juan, or I say, Kyle, what am I missing here in my own life? And only after I've received that input can I even contemplate. There's 3 other things that we have to think about doing, right? Like we are being deliberate about judging others. So I encourage you and I ask you, who have you given authority or permission to tell you when you're screwing up to? Perhaps it's your husband, your wife, men's group members, best friend. Because of our tendency to minimize our own shortcomings, it often takes a trusted brother or sister to show them to us in all of their terrible detail. Proverbs 27:6 says, faithful are the wounds of a friend. In other words, the mark of a true friend is that they are willing to wound us with loving correction. The revelations do not feel good. They hurt like real wounds, but we receive them as an expression of our friend's love for us. So before you go to judge another, you must first confront the sin in your own life. Point 2, you must have the right motive when you judge another person. Remember, I said that Jesus exposes our hearts. He exposes the category of motive. In Matthew 6:1, earlier in this sermon, he says, beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them. For then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. In other words, it's very possible to do the right thing for the wrong reason. And the right thing in this context is judging another person. And so now I'm asking you, why are you judging them? Are we pointing out their sins because we love them, we genuinely want what's best for them? Or are we pointing their sins out because those sins have hurt us, because we are angry at them? Perhaps we rejoice at their suffering because they have wronged us. We want to see them hurt, and we know that just the particular statement, the way that I'm going to bring this to your attention is going to cut you to the quick. Maybe our own reputation will increase as theirs decreases. Maybe it's a horrible mixture of good and bad motives. As Paul cries out, who will save me from this body of death? So what should your motive be when judging others? So let's look at some Bible passages that suggest an answer. I'm going to go through these quickly. You don't have to go through them with me. But Galatians 6:1 says, brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Matthew 18:15 through 17 says, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. But if he does not listen, take 1 or 2 others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to you, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. James 5:19 through 20. My brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings a sinner back from his wandering will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins. And 2 Timothy 3:16 says, all Scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness. In a word, the ultimate objective of the confrontation, the judgment of sin, is the restoration of the offending brother or sister into right relationship with God. God knows that we all, like sheep, have gone astray. So God uses our brothers and sisters, and it's at this point that I want you all to look around. He uses your brothers and sisters to restore you to relationship with him. In other words, it is to be expected that at some point, in some way, in this corporate life together as Gallup Hill Baptist Church in Ledyard, Connecticut in 2023, you will be needed, using the Word of God, to call out the sin in your brother or sister's life with the goal of restoring them to right relationship with God. And I encourage you to be ready for when that call comes. Similarly, you may be in receipt of reproof when you go astray. And you must also be ready to receive that, because remember, we have perception problems. We have beams in our own eyes, but we can see the specks in another. We do not judge rightly when it comes to our own sin. I need Tony to come up, call me to the side, and say, Aaron, we got to talk. And that transaction should not be unexpected, out of the ordinary. We all deal with leftover indwelling sin, and we are put in this place together to help overcome that sin. So you have to have the right motive, restoration to right relationship with God, before you judge another. So to review points 1 and 2, right? First, confront your own sin before judging another, and then have the right motive. We'll move on to point 3. Third, you must be gentle when judging others, and not harsh. Listen again to Galatians 1. Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. As I was preparing for the sermon, I read a commentator who observed that in any other context, the act of removing a speck from someone's eye is called eye surgery. And then noted that when an eye surgeon removes something from the eye, because of how sensitive the eye is and how many nerve endings there are there, does so very, very carefully. The imagery is helpful because it reminds us that judging another is a very delicate business. You must carefully assess the individual, their personality. You have to think about how best to bring this topic up. You have to think about what you want to say. And then with skill and precision, you remove the speck. You gently reprove the individual. In the alternative, you come in hot with volume and all sorts of evidence, and you're very likely to get shut down, right? And so that's why Paul encourages the reproof to happen gently. And I think it's one of the reasons why he reserves the function to spiritually mature believers. And this doesn't refer to an elite class of Christians like the Christian Navy SEALs, but rather to those who have more maturity and experience in the Christian life and are in a better position to help their brother and sister. So in this context, spiritual means nothing more than living and walking according to the Holy Spirit. And listen to what Paul, how he describes himself in Ephesians 3:6, because he says, to me, though I am the very least of all saints, this grace was given to preach to the Gentiles the unsearchable riches of Christ. In other words, one of the greatest saints calls himself the least of all the saints. And I think that's because the closer you grow to God, the more you realize just how sinful you are. And it is that humility, which is the very opposite of the self-righteousness that we saw in the Pharisee. It is that humility that enables you to gently reprove another's sins, fully aware of the struggle that you went through as God worked in your own life to bring about spiritual maturity. And so that function is reserved for spiritually mature believers to gently restore someone to right relationship with God. So first, you address the sin in your own life. Second, I forgot, right? You restore, you have the right motive. Third, you are gentle. And fourth, and here's where this verse 6 comes in, you must use discernment about when someone is ready to have their sins judged. Listen again to Jesus' warning in verse 6. Do not give dogs what is holy. Do not throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you. What is holy and the pearls that Jesus talks of are the things of the kingdom of God. When you are judging another's sin, you are talking about sin and righteousness. These are things of the kingdom of God. And Jesus recognizes that some people are just not going to be ready to have a person, even one who has confronted the own sin in their life, has the right motive, and who is doing the reproof as gently as they can to judge the sin in their lives. Rather, like a fierce, undomesticated animal, and he uses the examples of wild dogs and the pigs, they will turn on you with great violence. So Jesus is telling us that we must be wise and discerning about when to judge others. If those individuals demonstrate that they're not willing to hear what you have to say, and this is not an interpersonal relations class, but we have any number of ways that people signal to us that they're really kind of shutting us down without shutting us down. They could be ignoring us. They could get angry. They could sort of avoid talking to us. Oh, there comes Aaron. I'm going to go the other way, right? Like we get this, right? And so if you see that when you're honestly trying to do those things for another's benefit, you should stop doing it and move on to whoever the Holy Spirit leads you to. The practical advice is repeated regarding the treasures of the kingdom elsewhere in the book of Matthew. In chapter 10:14, Jesus says to his disciples as he sends them out, "And if anyone will not receive you or listen to your words, shake the dust off your feet when you leave that house or town." In other words, there's some practical guidance here. Jesus understands that we have limited time, limited effort, limited energy, and so don't keep going back to somebody who's not ready to have the sin reproved. What you should do is you continue to pray for that individual, and you continue to ask God to bring other people into their lives to speak with authority regarding the sin that you see. So there you have it. How to judge others, taking into account two sin natures, yours and your brother or sister's, right? So we remember that we must do so not in a spirit of self-righteousness, and we remember these 4 principles about how to judge others. And so I hope you find this helpful to parse the understanding of Jesus' command to judge not, and gives you a little bit more ability to respond to an unbelieving world when they say, well, Christians shouldn't judge. Jesus says it right here that you shouldn't judge. And the answer is more complicated than that. And so I hope the last 25 minutes or so gives you the ability to not only respond to that, but also when you're called upon to do so in this congregation, to gently reprove others or yourself be reproved. So let's pray together. Father, thank you for your gracious provision to us about how to respond to the sin in another's life. Help us to earnestly seek to address our own sins through your grace before judging others, to have the right motive before judging others, and to be gentle while doing so. Help us to be wise and discerning as we seek to bring somebody back into right relationship with you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. That's it, right? Dismissed? You are dismissed. Enjoy your Sundays.